Hello and welcome to an impromptu deck tech on Weapons Manufacturing Affinity. I recently took this deck to a 8-1 finish at a Pro Tour qualifier in Las Vegas. I can say that it's probably one of the best things to be doing in Modern, and if you're not playing this deck, you should at least know how to play against it. Which sounds simple in theory, just blow up their artifacts, but I think there's a bit more going on than people realize. So obviously, if you're unfamiliar, the core of Affinity is you're making a lot of artifacts to cast this guy right here. This is a big turtle, he gets unblockable, he's untargetable, he grows. You know, a lot of people didn't realize that he can't be blocked. That is a very important thing to know about the card, is that every time they play an artifact, this card is going to be a clock. A lot of players did not calculate for me drawing cards and potentially whiffing on artifacts, stuff like that. It is a thing to consider with Kappa Cannoneer, especially in the pilot seat. And I think as a result, Kappa Cannoneer is a really good place to start from describing how to play the deck. So the big thing with Kappa Cannoneer is you need 5 artifacts to pay for its improvised cost, and you need to have some artifacts entering to make him unblockable and continue to attack with it. The Ward 4 is important, but it's also important to remember that it is not unbeatable. They can obviously just pay 4 mana for Kappa Cannoneer's Ward cost, but the other option is they can just consign to memory the Ward trigger. So, like, let's say you're playing against Jeskai Blink and they evoke a Solitude, and then they consign the Kappa Cannoneer trigger. You're now down a Kappa Cannoneer. So something to consider when you're playing against Blink is that you need to have a wide variety of options. And this deck is particularly great at that. So let's go into how we get these 5 artifacts for Kappa Cannoneer. So there's a lot of options, but generally the deck plays around 20 to 19 zero-cost artifacts, the best of which being Mox Opal. If you're not familiar with this card, it's a 0-mana artifact that taps your mana if you have 3 artifacts, and it gives you 1 mana of any color. It is arguably one of the most busted cards in terms of raw power level in Modern right now, and I think it's a very good place to experiment with deck building. There's a lot of decks playing Mox Opal that wouldn't function otherwise. This deck being one of them, but also stuff like Izzet Steelcutter, etc. All require this card to really function as a deck. The next one is probably one of my favorite Magic cards of all time, Mishra's Bauble. It's a 0-mana artifact. You tap it, sacrifice it, you get to get some info on the top card of a player's deck, and you draw at the beginning of the next upkeep. Mishra's Bauble is really complicated by itself. This deck doesn't get to play fetch lands, so arguably it's a little less complicated. Some lists will play 2 Scalding Tarns. I currently do not opt for that because I find the life total in the deck is already pretty pressured by virtue of the mana base where you play 4 Fiery Islets. But some people will play 2 Scalding Tarns and a Steam Vents and a Basic Island and call it a day. And if you want that top deck manipulation, then Mishra's Bauble is pretty great. And there's definitely some shells where you want that more than others. Specifically if you're on Preordain, that's a pretty good option. But Mishra's Bauble is really important because it lets you rebuy artifacts, rebuy cards basically, by playing a 0-mana artifact. The rest of your 0-mana artifacts don't really rebuy themselves. Closet Gix does nothing. Tormod's Crypt can exile their graveyard, and Engineer Explosives can be a board wipe, but you're almost always casting it for 0 if you're casting an early game. Sometimes you cast it for 1 against Amulet, Boros, stuff like that, but generally a card that is being cast for 0. All of these 0-mana artifacts synergize very well in your deck with Pinnacle Emissary. This is probably one of the most important cards for making the deck function. The deck only really became a thing because this card was printed. It is a 3/3 artifact robot. When you cast an artifact spell, you get a 1/1 drone token that can only block creatures with flying. That part is really, really, really important. I was playing against a Jeskai Blink player in RSDQ recently who did not know that the drone tokens cannot block Ragavan. That is a huge, huge part of this card. Always remember that, and if your opponent does not notice it, take advantage of that. For 1 mana, you can warp it, which is the same thing as casting it, just comes in for cheaper cost, and it's a 3/3. So a ideal affinity hand is a good example. Is you want 2 0-cost artifacts, a Pinnacle Emissary, a Kappa Cannoneer, a Mox Opal, and we'll say a Spirebluff Canal and the Saga, just for the sake of a argument. This is a turn 1 Kappa Cannoneer. You can go turn 1, Spirebluff Canal, or Pinnacle Emissary, cast your 3/0 drops, get 3 drones, play Kappa Cannoneer. That is the best hand, no holds barred, in the deck. If you get a turn 1 Kappa Cannoneer, they're dead usually turn 3, turn 4, because Kappa Cannoneer will continue to grow as you play more artifacts, so the clock gets quicker. So, Pinnacle Emissary is a way to get the artifacts for Kappa Cannoneer. Your other options, of course, are just playing multiple artifacts and casting it. When you're considering opening hands for this deck, a lot of the time you want to be looking for Pinnacle Emissary, some 0 drops, or you want to be looking for Kappa Cannoneer and like 2 or 3 0 drops, or and some lands, or you want to be looking for something along those lines. Those are usually a lot of good openers, and you're willing to mull for those, because this deck mulligans really well. You can mulligan the 5 and consistently win games. I think almost every third or second game of the tournament, I was mulliganing the 5, and still casting Kappa Cannoneer, still winning the game. But let's say that you don't have a Kappa Cannoneer in hand, but you still have some strong cards in hand, like Mox Opal and Mishra's Bauble and all that. Well, then the deck has a large suite of cards that can take advantage of this fact. Emry, Lurker the Lock, is really popular right now because this is a card that is great into uninteractive combo decks, such as Amulet Titan, Storm, and Neoform. Emry is a amazing card advantage engine, as you can see. She's basically 1 mana for a 1/2 that lets you see 4 cards, and then you can cast artifacts from those 4 cards. And you can also do things like sacrifice Mishra's Bauble to loop it and draw more cards, or let's say you have a hard cast Pinnacle Emissary on board after you warped it, you can sacrifice Tormod's Crypt and then just recast with Emry if you don't have anything else to do, and you get a drone. There's a lot of stuff like that where Emry gives you nitty-gritty value, and because your opponent's not interacting with it, it's going to slowly run away with the game if it goes unimpeded. Emry is at its best when it's backed up with Metallic Rebuke. You see a lot of those that play Emry still are on Rebuke. Most decks that are cutting Emry do not play Rebuke anymore. They actually play Thoughtcast and Preordain, which is why Preordain's here. I don't have a copy of Thoughtcast. Preordain's also just great filler, great card filtering. Very important if you want to see more consistent hands. I think Thoughtcast is a little on the weaker side, but I think Preordain can probably go in any Affinity deck as long as you have the flex slots. Rebuke itself is just a 1 mana leak if you have Improvise 2. And that's one really important thing to consider with Affinity is how many artifacts you are leaving untapped for Rebuke, because if you don't have Rebuke, you still want to signal that you can have Rebuke. Another interesting card to consider with this package of Preordain, specifically in Thoughtcast, is Arayo. This is a new tech that we are seeing in Izzet Steelcutter builds. In Affinity, I think this card is also pretty strong. I've been testing it with Emry. It's great because Emry can give you an extra spell cast to make sure Arayo gets flipped more consistently. She's a 1/1 when you cast whenever the 4th spell of a turn is cast. So let's say your opponent casts 3 spells and you Metallic Rebuke one of them, you can flip Arayo. When Arayo flips, she turns into this legendary gem, and that counters the first spell played by each opponent each turn. That is very good against a lot of decks. It's basically a permanent Chancellor of the Annex like effect, but like it's a hard counter. It's a fucking decree of a negation or whatever. So there's this whole mid-range package, and capstoning that is weapons manufacturing. This is much like Pinnacle Emissary, a way to get more artifacts on the board. But the benefit of weapons manufacturing is that whenever a non-token artifact comes in, you get, and it's not cast, it's enters, you get a munitions token. And this is a unique token because it's one of the only tokens in the game that I can think of that has a leaves the battlefield trigger and no other abilities. The munitions tokens deal 2 damage to any target when they leave. And this is a munitions token, and you can tap these for Improvised Cost or Metallic Rebuke and Kappa Cannoneer, but more importantly, you can sacrifice them at will. There are plenty of ways to do that in the deck, but the best ones are Claws of Gix and Arcbound Ravager, with the close third being Engineered Explosives on 0. You can pop it and then crack them all to kill your opponent. Arguably the best thing, if you have the mana and the time to set it up, is Arcbound Ravager, because this card gets to sacrifice munitions at instant speed, grow itself, and then deal 2 damage to anything every time you sacrifice 1. So it's basically a Mega Goblin Bombardment at that point, right? And Ravager itself is an older card with some complicated mechanics, and not everyone might be familiar with the extent of how you can utilize Ravager, so I'm going to go into that real quick. So you can sacrifice an artifact, put a counter on it, and it's got modular 1. It's going to come in with a 1/1 counter, and then whenever it leaves, you can put all of its counters on an artifact creature. That's really important because Arcbound Ravager's sacrifice ability, as you can see, does not specify another artifact. You can sacrifice, we'll say, 4 munitions tokens to Ravager, or 3. You can sacrifice 3, make it a 4/4, deal 6 damage to your opponent, and then sacrifice Ravager to its own ability to pump up, we'll say, a unblockable Kappa Cannoneer. You've just added 4 damage to your Kappa Cannoneer, and then 6 damage on top of that. That's 10 damage total, and you're now swinging with KC. And that's like a really big way against a lot of these grindier, fair creature decks to win out. Weapons manufacturing is pretty bad into combo decks. You're gonna side out your 2 Ravagers and your 4 weapons manufacturing a lot against combo decks, because there's just not a lot that manufacturing can do. Your deck already puts a very quick clock to board, and this is a thing that's going to be functioning turn 4, turn 5. Sometimes you'll keep 1 or 2 in, depending on the matchup, because you just want extra ways to make tokens, but only really keep it in on the play, in my opinion, if you're playing against combo. The other option for sacrificing stuff is Closet Gix. This is a very expensive card now. It's $15 a piece. I don't know why. Probably because it only has 2 printings. And it's very much so played in this deck. It's a 0-cost artifact. You can pay 1, sacrifice permanent, gain a life. Very simple, very good. You can sacrifice munitions and deal 2 damage against Boros, stuff like that. And then the life gain is actually relatively important because, like, let's say Boros has a Goblin Bombardment on board, you can actually recoup the life loss from taking damage from Bombardment. So that is a very important aspect of the card. Don't forget to gain life. And sometimes, you know, if your opponent Wrath of the Skies use stuff like that, you can sacrifice some permanents, gain some life. It comes up. I often will activate Closet Gix, sacrificing stuff, and then looping it with Emery to get extra drone tokens, stuff like that. But as you notice, all these are 0 costs. All these artifacts are 0 costs, and I haven't gotten into Tormod's Crypt. It's just Graveyard Hate. It's important. You want it against Amulet, you want it against Storm, you want it against a lot of stuff. But all these 0 costs and 1 costs can all be tutored with Urza Saga, which is arguably the glue of the deck. Urza Saga is an enchantment land, which means it gets blown up by enchantment hate. Wrath of the Skies and Force of Vigor being 2 very big ones. You can add a colorless mana, you can create XX constructs that get buffed for each artifact you control, which is just a win con by itself. And you can sacrifice it to tutor. And you can grab any of these 0-cost artifacts, which it is context dependent. But if you want to grab specifically a 0-drop, you're almost always going to grab Mox Opal. Mox Opal is almost always going to be the best card in your deck because it is mana. It's literally just free mana. There's no reason not to grab it. It always comes up. You always are like, oh, I don't need the extra mana. And then somehow you actually did need the Mox Opal mana. But pending you not having a Mopal, or pending you need to grab some other stuff, Bobble's a fine grab to loop with Emery, or, of course, let's say you have a Kappa Cannoneer, or you just created a construct. All of these are pretty good, except for Pithing Needle. Pithing Needle is context dependent. You're going to cut this in some matchups, you're going to keep it in some matchups. But Shadow Spear and Skateboard are the best ones in terms of the equipment. There was some other options people used to play, like Cranial Plating, that can't be grabbed by Saga, but there was some other stuff. Shadow Spear is insane. With the constructs on board, it's going to gain you so much life. It's going to stabilize you so quick. I had so many games against Boros this weekend where I was able to just gain 8-9 life using Shadow Spear. And the trample is very important. You want to cut Shadow Spear against matchups where your opponents can't jump block very much, but if they can jump block, it's really good. Skateboard, I don't think I've ever cut this card once. It's just haste on a thing, and then you can tap an opponent's permanent. The reason this is being played over Lava Spur Boots is because, like, let's say you grab it off of Saga while you have a construct on board, and you make another construct, and your opponent's 1 blocker, you've basically turned one of your constructs into a mini Kappa Cannoneer. It lets you cheat combat so easily. And because modern creature density isn't, like, that high, except for Boros, like, this is very, very relevant. Also, you can do stuff like tap down Trinisphere, post board against Amulet Titan to enable you to cast more spells. That's a really important line that not a lot of people have thought about. Definitely something that you should remember. Trinispheres, and its ability only works if it's untapped. But the big thing with Saga is generally if it's in your opening hand, especially if you have Mox Opal, you want to play it on turn 1. a Saga in opener is almost always better being played on turn 1 because it's going to let you cheat a mana on turn 3 by tapping it, floating a mana, and then grabbing a Mox Opal or something to cast a Kappa Cannoneer. If you play it on turn 2 and try to like orient directly for constructs, it's too slow. You kind of want to hope you can just get good luck and find a Mox Opal to get constructs, and then if you draw it later, it's going to be recurring value. Because you play 4 of them, I mean, the odds of you drawing them are not bad. Pithing Needle, there's a long and convoluted list of ways to play this card. There's a whole spreadsheet for Pithing Needle names for Affinity. Look it up if you want. It's on Twitter. But yeah, I mean, that's really the core of the deck. The biggest thing with this deck, by far, is considering your mulligans. Every hand should have 0 drops, obviously, but you want ways to benefit from them. This was the thing that I struggled with when I was first picking it up, is I'd keep these hands with 6-0 drops and dump my hand turn 1, but it didn't do anything. And that's why you need Pinnacle Emissary, that's why you need Kappa Cannoneer, that's why you need Weapons Manufacturing, and sometimes you even want to stall a turn before you can dump your hand just to get the benefits. Because these benefit cards, these payoff cards, are the only reason that deck works. You need these cards in your opener, and if they aren't there, you're probably dirtling too hard. Like 6-0 drops in like a Urza Saga is not good enough. But an Urza Saga, a Pinnacle Emissary, and then like 2-0 drops and an extra land or 2, that's great. Stuff like that. The mana base of the deck is also weird. Like I said, it's pretty much fetchless. You get 2 Sink in the Stoopers usually, a Fiery Eyelid. This card's very important. You want to consider when to sacrifice this and when to not sacrifice it. Usually, if you need more cards to cast to get this Kappa Cannoneer to be quicker, you want to sacrifice this. And then Spirebluff Canal. Because you do play 4 lands that ping you for 1 and then 2 lands that ping you for 3 when they enter, your life total is something important to be thought about. That's why Claws of Gix is relevant. But yeah, I mean, really the other thing with Affinity is the sideboarding can get a little weird. And post-side, your opponents get access to a lot of very efficient board wipe spells, such as Wrath of the Skies, so you need to be considering that with your hands, and you need to be considering if you can get immediate payoff from dumping your hand against decks post-board that get to utilize these board wipes like Wrath of the Skies, Force of Vigor, Meltdown, all that. People will almost always be going for stuff like killing your Pinnacle Emissary in response to you casting your second spell after casting a Mox Opal turn 1, stuff like that. So Rebuke and Mox Opal become higher stock value in game 2 and 3. Like if you have a hand with Rebuke, Mox Opal, Pinnacle Emissary, those hands are usually better because they're going to waste spells trying to deal with it, especially against Amulet. And that's a big thing with Pinnacle as well, is if you're playing against Jeskai Blank, they're going to try to Solitude it in response to you casting your second spell and then blow you out next turn with Wrath of the Skies. So you need to be considering if you can afford to have your Pinnacle Emissary blown up for free in some of those matchups. But also, this is where the sideboard comes in. So my sideboard's unorthodox. This card is pretty common in sideboards right now because of, like I said, all the free interaction spells like Solitude, Force of Vigor, all that. It is tutorable Saga, and it counters any spell being cast for free. I think this card is okay against Amulet Titan. It shuts off Summoner's Pact, it shuts off Force of Vigor, stuff like that. Mystical Dispute, that's for blue decks. Force Negation, this card's a little, I don't know if I'd actually run this in the future. It's okay against Scapeshift and Amulet Titan. It's okay against Amulet itself. It's okay against Wrath of the Skies. You want it against decks that are trying to resolve one big spell to win the game against you. Swan Song, pretty good. A lot better against fair decks than unfair decks. Whip Flares for Boros and Yawgmoth and stuff. Same thing with Galvanic Blast. You'll bring in 1 or 2 of these against Amulet sometimes if they play multiple Collector Roofs or 6s. Damping Sphere, very good. You want this against Amulet and Storm. Consigned Memory, same thing, Amulet, Storm, and Eldrazi. And Emery is an additional card for combo decks. But realistically, one important thing with this deck is you can't block Ragavan. There's not really a lot of ways to block a turn 1 Ragavan. So any deck that plays Ragavan, you want these. You want these against them. Because Ragavan, if he goes resolved and unanswered, he will win the game against you eventually. But, I mean, that's really the core of the deck. Like I said, it's fairly simple. And the biggest thing with this is you want to get as many reps as possible. Goldfish, go on Moto, do everything you can to get as many reps practicing opening hands with this deck, because that is where the money is with this deck. It's not in technical play necessarily. While there is some heuristics you need to learn here and there, it's the first 3 turns of the game. Learn the first 3 turns of the game and you will win with this deck. You will have a positive win rate. It is very hard to fuck up unless the metagame is very prepared for you. So with that, look at some deck lists, try to find some Mox Opals, or if you already own them, thank God. And if you don't, and you want a way to play this deck still, try out Magic Online. Get a card holder subscription. It's definitely worth the money, and this deck is fucking cheap too. It's like $15 a month on rental services, I think, on Moto. So try it out. I can thoroughly advocate for this being the best aggressive deck in Modern. And if you're looking for a change of pace and you want to make some macro decisions, this is the deck for you.